Hello and welcome to Football Talk by the 2 Point Conversion. Today, I'm joined by Jacob LaQuire. I'm Dylan Jackson. Jacob, how are you doing today?
Doing well. A little congested because it's allergy season, but ready to roll, ready to power through it. I had a ginger ale right before we hopped on, so I should be good for at least an hour or so.
Yeah, glad to hear it. Today, we're going to talk some kind of the lingering questions left over from, the majority of the offseason, which has already taken place. Free agency's done, the draft is done. We're now in off-season programs for these NFL teams, OTAs. The owners' meetings just happened. Tush push was not banned. Uh, but today we're going to kind of answer some of the questions around the league that, you know, about some of these teams kind of in the middle of the NFL, trying to maybe stave off some of the regression from what typically happens in the offseason for these more loaded teams. And we'll start with the Dallas Cowboys, right? The Dallas Cowboys last year had a very disappointing season. They ended up, with the 12th overall pick, took Tyler Booker in the second and third round, Savon Ravel, Donovan Ezraku. They traded for Kyer Elam and George Pickens, and they signed a few different running backs, not necessarily anybody of note, Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams. They added to that room in the draft as well with Phil Maffa, with Jaden Blue. I kind of want to get your thoughts on the Cowboys and how they did over the course of this offseason. Did they get better? Did they get worse? And then we'll kind of dive deeper into them as well.
I think every team gets better to a degree, right? You're not, especially a team that doesn't lose their QB, doesn't have a ton of churn, right? They still have Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb. I really liked them trading for George Pickens. I think that's a really good 1-2 punch in the receiver room. They did lose their coach. It was a kind of a mutual firing, right? They actually they didn't fire him because they wouldn't let him go interview with the Bears. But then 2 days later, his contract ran out, so they had made their decision by then. But they promote from within with Brian Schottenheimer, who was the offensive coordinator last year. So every team gets better, right? Unless no, every team got better this offseason. And it's to what degree did they get better? I think is the question we have to ask here. I don't know, because if you look at the division, right, I think we can both agree they're not the favorite in the division. We could even argue about if they're second or third, right? We can both agree the Giants are probably last right now. But I just don't know. I think Schottenheimer is so much of an unknown, and I think it's such a comfort choice for Jerry Jones. I don't know if there's enough potential from the core group that was already there, right? The big signing or trade or whatever or draft pick that they had was Pickens, right? George Pickens. And I don't think he was a true elevator in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure how much I should say he's going to elevate the Cowboys offense. So did they get better? Yes. But did they do enough to contend for the wild card? I don't know. I think the probably the 6th and 7th spots in the NFC wild card race, are pretty wide open. But I just don't know, because if you look at last year, we had all the NFC North teams that were strong. Washington was strong last year. And then you have a lot of teams that I think got much, much better, like maybe Arizona or something like that. So I don't know if the Cowboys did enough to be able to compete, but at least they didn't regress. And I think that's something that you can be happy about if you're a Cowboys fan. The big question for me is, what can Schottenheimer do that McCarthy couldn't do the last 4 or so? Was he there for 4 or 5 years? And for the first 3 of those years, he won 12 games back to back to back. So, what can Schottenheimer do to get back to that winning mantra?
Yeah, I'll start with Schottenheimer. I think that with him, he is, like you said, kind of just a safe pick for head coach, right? It almost seems like Jerry Jones just kind of took the guy that was already in the room that he knew personally and just made him head coach and not really go through a full coaching search. In my opinion, that's probably not the best way to build a consistent winner, at least in my opinion, because end of day, I think that there's probably dozens of guys that would have been a better, I guess, a better team builder than a guy like Schottenheimer, right? He's, we'll see how the offense looks, but he wasn't even calling plays for what this offense was last year. In terms of the progression of this Cowboys team, I think the sell behind this offseason is going to be the addition of Tyler Booker, solidifying the offensive line, the addition of George Pickens, adding a secondary kind of playmaker to your offense in Pickens. But I think the real sell is, late in the year, this Cowboys team was really feisty. They won a ton
Mhm.
of games late in the stretch. And honestly, for a while, I thought it was going to save Mike McCarthy's job and ended up not necessarily doing that. But I think the sell is, you have the progression late in the season from a lot of these guys on the roster. They were pretty banged up early in the year. You add in the fact that Dak Prescott is going to be back healthy with that sort of team, along with the additions that they made on the offense. I think that's an easy sell if you're a Cowboys fan. The problem that I have is this isn't necessarily a front office that seems like it's, you know, put the interest of winning this year first, right?
Mhm.
They don't really push money into the future on a lot of their contracts. They wait to sign a lot of their internal free agents, so it ends up costing them more in the long run, right? Micah Parsons still doesn't have a deal for 2026, right? Um, CD Lamb, they only got a deal done like basically last minute, right? Odigizua, same deal. Like they had to franchise tag him, got a long term deal eventually, but had they signed him like even midway through the season, that deal is going to cost a lot less. So it's just, I think, from ownership and the general manager being Jerry Jones for this team, it really puts a damper on what could have been an even better offseason, I think.
Yeah, I think what you're looking for here is there was no urgency, or there's not enough urgency to build a consistent winner, at least this season. You talk about Micah Parsons. They could have extended him, and now he's going to have to. I think we can assume he's going to top the Jamar Chase deal, which is 40. Was it 40? No, no, I'm thinking of Micah Parsons. Or I can't speak. The Miles Garrett deal, which is 40 per year. It's going to have to go up higher than that, and I think the Cowboys are going to be in a good place cap wise because they rarely do the big deals. They don't sign external free agents. But even so, you could have been in a better spot if you got ahead of it, just like you talked about with the defensive tackle that they gave the franchise tag in the offseason. And then with Schottenheimer as well, you mentioned he didn't call plays this past year. I don't think he's called plays since he was back in Seattle. I think
Yeah.
that was 2020 or 2021. So quite some time in between there. Definitely a comfort pick by Jerry Jones. I thought that Kellen Moore might have ended up there, but because they waited last minute to get McCarthy out the building, I'm pretty sure they couldn't interview external candidates because McCarthy was still technically under contract. That's how they missed out on people like Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen, Aaron Glenn, who they were rumored to have been interested in, but obviously couldn't go after him. It's just interesting, right? This is a team that for the last 30 or so years that Jerry Jones and his family have owned it, they've been in the spotlight. They've been the loud team that wants to win, is always getting put in the national games and stuff like that. But it seems over the past couple years, the effort that the Jones family has put toward the team and pushing them to being competitive hasn't necessarily matched up with the vision of this Cowboys team of old. And I think if they don't win this year, or let's say if they miss the playoffs this year, I think it's going to be even more calls of urgency from the fan base. And I wonder how the Jones family is going to respond to that, given that, they're willing to sit on their hands.
In theory, this team has more than enough talent to make the playoffs, right? Obviously, we talked about the offensive line talent. It seems like every single year they're investing at least a first or second round pick in this offensive line, right? It is incredibly talented. Um, the star power of this team, Dak Prescott, above average quarterback. You have CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens. Defensively, you have Micah Parsons, Odigizua. Um, there's so much talent, so much more star power on this team in particular than most other NFL franchises. And I think there's a lot of, auxiliary kind of connective tissue pieces as well for this team. So I really think that there's not going to be many excuses outside of injuries for why this Dallas Cowboys team cannot make the playoffs in 2025. But we'll see how it kind of shakes out. Do you have any final thoughts on the Cowboys before we move to the next team?
Well, I would pose the question that you asked me at the start. Do you think they did enough in this offseason?
I think when you consider the average offseason for an NFL team where you're signing a ton of free agents, you're, adding a ton of talent through the draft. They added a few players via trade, but the external free agency pool that this team is bringing in every single year, it's not enough to keep up with these other teams. I think you need to add some sort of established talent to your team. I like Jack Sanborn, a linebacker that they got from Chicago on a pretty cheap deal. The running backs they signed just, quite frankly, aren't really starting caliber running backs in the NFL anymore. So we'll see if Miles Sanders can kind of resurrect his career behind a better offensive line. But I know me and you are pretty tired of that experiment in particular. So
He
um,
has something to prove, I guess.
every year he has something to
Yeah.
prove, apparently. So um, I don't think that they did enough to achieve their goals. I mean, they're a borderline playoff team, in my opinion. But if they truly were invested in building a winner, I think they would have made a different hire at head coach. They would have really approached the entire process differently. And I think that they would have been more aggressive in adding outside talent, not exclusive to the draft. So I would say my answer to that question would be no.
Yeah, I think you summed up what at least both of us are thinking. I agree. Didn't do enough. This could be a competitive team with Dak Prescott, Lamb, and Micah Parsons, but if they're not willing to improve as much as other teams do, I think is a good way to put it. Then yeah, they're not doing enough.
Moving on to the next team that we're going to talk about. I want to pose the question to you. I'm going to give you kind of an open first. The New York Jets, they signed we'll be generous here and we'll call him a potential franchise quarterback in Justin Fields, right? They sign a few, starting caliber defenders they bring back. Sherwood, the linebacker. I think they signed a nickel, if I'm not mistaken. They draft Armand Membu, Mason Taylor, Azariah Thomas, and they cut Devontae Adams from this team, saved like 40 million from doing that. So I want to pose the question to you. What should we expect in year one of the Aaron Glenn era for the New York Jets?
I think we should expect an adult football team. And what I mean by that is Aaron Glenn, no nonsense guy, right? Somebody that around the league people respect. He brings in people. I can't. Is it Tanner Engstrand, the offensive coordinator, along with him from Detroit? So there's some stuff there. Steve Wilkes is his defensive coordinator. Very highly respected around the league. I know as
Love that hire.
Panthers fans, we know how good of a leader, and not just a leader, how good of a defensive mind Steve Wilkes is. And when you have all that there, that consistency, grown-ups in the coaching staff, to be quite honest, and you're coming from like Joe Douglas, who just kind of messed around with trades, missed on all his draft picks. Robert Saleh, I thought was an adult, but he didn't mesh with the quarterback troubles that they had. And then Aaron Rodgers, who was kind of a de facto leader voice last year or the past couple years after they traded for him and didn't work out well. They ended up bringing in Nathaniel Hackett to be the offensive coordinator, who let's just say we know isn't very good when he doesn't have prime Aaron Rodgers beside him. And all of it kind of fell through because there wasn't like a consistent direction, too many voices, or like too many leadership voices talking over each other. But I think now that you have revamped the front office, the coaching staff, you've brought in players that I don't even know if last year's Justin Fields is better than end of year Rodgers last year, because I thought Rodgers played quite well in that last month, like December into January. But I think he'll be less of an issue in the locker room or less of an issue with the media. I think none of the receivers they have are going to be as good as Devontae Adams was last year. But if they're all on the same page and they can run the kind of system that Detroit ran, who like know how to get the best out of their players, I think it can work out there. I don't think they have the star power, but I think that just the cohesiveness and the leadership factor of the coaching staff should raise the floor. And I think if Steve Wilkes can get the defense playing like they were when Robert Saleh was there, the defense should be better than it was last year too. You got to remember, this was a defense that was consistently top like 3 to 5 when Salah was there for the full season. As soon as Salah was fired, the defense dropped off a cliff. I was writing about them today. They were closer to 20th than they were to first. A lot of the defensive metrics, especially in efficiency, were worse than the offensive side of the ball for the Jets. And if you think about that, that's insane because the Jets have so much defensive star power. But because there wasn't a coherent voice there last year, they really started to falter. So I think if the coaching staff can bring everybody together, get them all on the same page, this team should win more games than they did last year, even if they don't have as good of firepower at like the QB or the wide receiver 1 or 2 position.
I really like the bet on Fields. I think that the baseline of what he was giving the Steelers last year, um, to be honest, it may not be the an average starting quarterback in the NFL, but it is startable to some
Mhm.
degree, right? Like he's going to give you top 24, 23-ish quarterback play, which at times is going to be better than what Aaron Rodgers was providing for this Jets team. So I like the bet on him. And I think that, offensively, the players that they have in their core, right? They have two offensive tackles now, Armand Membu, Olufashanu. The interior offensive line infrastructure is something I can get behind as well. Simpson. They have Tipman. We'll see if Elijah Vera Tucker can stay healthy. And then I really like this duo of Brees Hall and I'm completely blanking on his name,
Braylon
but
Allen.
Braylon Allen. Yeah. I really like that duo combined with Justin Fields rushing the ball. I think that potentially you could see this end up being a top 5 rushing attack in the NFL this season. As far as the passing game, I think it's really rough. I really like Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to just get a ton of volume, maybe like, 2023 DJ Moore type of volume with what Justin Fields kind of just feeding him the ball the entire season. Mason Taylor, we'll see. He probably should be the second target in this offense immediately, just based off of what they
Yeah.
have in their receiving room. Like it is after Garrett Wilson, it's like Alan Lazard,
He was
Arians.
on the trading block, by the way,
Yeah,
believe it or not.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of the leftovers of Aaron Rodgers, teammates, right? So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But I think Mason Taylor should probably end up seeing a lot of volume early on. Um, Defensively, I actually really like Steve Wilkes with this team where they have Sauce Gardner, they have a few other secondary pieces here as well. I like a kind of aggressive approach that Steve Wilkes brings defensively, where, if you have corners that can man up against really good separators like Sauce Gardner, I think it's really going to allow, Wilkes to bring a lot more pressure, which he loves to do. So I think it's a really good fit schematically on the defensive side of the ball. And I think it's just going to work out really well with Aaron Glenn being the CEO type head coach, not having to call a defense, even like schematically, defensively in Detroit. He wasn't necessarily the best guy, and even when he had statistically poor defensive seasons like he did in 2023, he was still getting a ton of NFL head coaching interviews, right? So I just think he's somebody that is going to really prove his worth as that type of coach.
I like the Garrett Wilson shout out. I don't think it's going to be as rough as it could have been just because Fields and Wilson have familiarity, right? Going back to Ohio State.
Right.
Mason Taylor should be getting 2023 Sam Laporta type of production if they can consistently get the ball to him. But I love the Steve Wilkes fit, right? When he started, when he started with Carolina, he was a secondaries coach, if I'm not mistaken, the DBs coach. And I
Right.
think when you have a defensive coordinator that starts at the back and can see the whole field, he coaches the DBs, right? So that's taking care of the entire field. I think that gives you a better perspective. I think Azrae Thomas, the third round corner that they added, also fits that man coverage style that Steve Wilkes likes to deploy. For me, if this defense wants to take the next step and get back to top 3 or something, I think one of the young outside linebackers needs to take a step. So Will McDonald, he showed promise last year, and Jermaine Johnson. I think if you can get something like a 12 sack season out of one of those guys, that's the leap that this defense needs.
I really think that the Jets could end up winning more games than what we expect next year. Maybe they're still like a bottom of that league type of team, like, bottom 16, I mean. But the fact that they're going to be capable of running the ball efficiently between Fields, Brees Hall, Braylon Allen, and the fact that this defense is just incredibly talented, that combination typically bodes well to at least keeping games close. And if they can keep games close, they can probably win a few of those as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the Steelers' formula for how long's it been since Big Ben retired? Like that's what they've been doing, and they've yet to have a losing season in that span. I don't know if I'm there with the Jets, having them go 9-8 or higher, but I think they're closer to 7-10, 8-9 than
That's
they are
about the
to
range.
the 5-12 that they were this past year.
Yeah, I think that's probably the range for them. I'm interested to see if they view Fields as a multi-year starter, or if it's going to be a thing where maybe they're just frustrated in kind of what he gives them game to game. But I really do think that after this year, there's going to be a lot of positive signs coming out of this Jets organization. I think that after just honestly like a year from hell with this Jets team, having, like you said, kind of an adult in the building in Aaron Glenn is really going to be beneficial for what they want to accomplish.
For sure. I think this is a team that even if they get positive returns from Justin Fields, maybe not franchise level stuff, but they like him enough, they could extend him and then try to get the future guy. Like the past couple of times they've tried to get the future guy, they've just gone all in, right? Zach Wilson, Sam Darn, Aaron Rodgers, and it just doesn't work because there's nothing else in place. At least Fields can be a good fallback if they decide to go in next year's draft and maybe trade it for Drew Aller or something. So I don't think Manning will be in the draft, but one of those guys. And then they can have multiple QBs in the room and have a plan for the future.
They have a wide receiver one. They have a really solid infrastructure for their offensive line, and they have defensive talent. It's just, I think they need one more offseason before they can fully get to where they need to go from a talent perspective, I think.
For sure. I think the next team has a couple of those pieces, just not the defensive part.
Let's get into it then. So the next team we're going to talk about is the Cincinnati Bengals. They had probably one of the weirdest off seasons I think I've ever seen. Right. So they, quite frankly, didn't do anything in free agency. They signed like TJ Slayton, who was a rotational defensive tackle, kind of a run stopper for the Green Bay Packers last year. Interesting bet. He's a young second contract player, but really outside of him, they honestly didn't do anything of note. They re-signed Jamar Chase. They re-signed T. Higgins, both to pretty substantial contracts. And in the draft, they took Shamar Stewart, Demetrius Knight, and Dylan Fairchild in the first 3 rounds. So I want to get your initial thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, they disappointed a little bit last year. What should we expect realistically for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2025? Should we expect them to be a playoff team, maybe a little bit below that, or kind of a disappointment once again?
Unfortunately, I think we're going to get more of the same 8-9 to 10-7, I guess. They always seem to start slow, right? The past couple of years, they've started the first 4 games 1-3. Year before that, it was 2-2, and some of that was Joe Burrow not having clean off seasons. But last year he did, and they still came out the game. So they lost week 1 to the Patriots. It was like a weird game in week 1. But like you said, I'm looking at our lads right now. No new offensive starters, right? They retained Chase and Higgins, which is good, but no real changes there. They had some good backup O linemen, but other than that, nothing. Go to the defense. The only new projected starter is Slayton, who you mentioned, the rotational defensive lineman. And you talk about what they did in the draft. I think we did a pod like a month ago or like right after the draft about how much that we didn't like their draft class, how much it was confusing, lacked urgency, like we talked about with the Cowboys. But then on the defensive side of the ball, and bear in mind, they were a bottom quarter of the league defense in almost every metric. Their star edge rusher, Trey Hendrickson, might sit out this season, like ongoing contract debates with him. And then their first round pick, who's another defensive end, Shamar Stewart, he is the only rookie to not participate in the rookie mini camp or like the phase two OTAs because he has contract disputes with him. So you drafted this guy not necessarily to replace Trey Hendrickson, but as good insurance, right? If Hendrickson doesn't play or plays elsewhere. But even he's not on the field because you're having these stingy contract things that you just can't seem to get away from. This is going all the way back to like in the Andy Dalton times. Like they never extended defensive players on their own team or like their own defensive players. The only one I can think of is Geno Atkins, who got a sizable extension. Other than that, like nobody comes to mind. And if they're going to continue to do this, I just can't see the Bengals going past 9-8 or whatever they were last year because they have firepower on offense, right? That's really cool. But if they're the worst defense of all time, if they match the 2024 Panthers, it doesn't matter. Like you saw the Panthers at the end of the year scoring 30 plus in every game and having to go to overtime to win. You saw the Bengals scoring it seems like 50 points per game against the Ravens and still losing. So if you can't figure anything out on defense, I just don't think you're going to get anywhere this year.
This is probably like, I'm so glad I'm not a Bengals fan because I think this would be one of the most frustrating off seasons I've ever seen. Obviously keeping Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are good. They didn't push any money into future years. If you look at the cap hits for each contract, it's front loaded for each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So realistically, that's all they could do in free agency was bring those guys back on really substantial contracts. That's why they were only able to sign TJ Slayton. In terms of the draft, like the philosophy behind who they picked, it was just kind of all over the place, right? Shamar Stewart, probably one of the most raw players in the draft. He's somebody that you're going to need to kind of let cook a little bit. It may be a few years before he's like an above average defensive end. That's what you're hoping for, at least with him being a first round pick. And then in the second round, they went in the complete opposite direction, taking somebody who's going to turn 25 years old this year in Demetrius Knight, kind of a run stuffing linebacker, not somebody that even projects to be a starter, even at that age, despite, taking him in the second round, I think a top 50 pick. So really just kind of all over the place with those two picks in particular. And then, even with the Shamar Stewart thing, they haven't even signed him, which is just kind of bizarre to me. Like, how cheap do you have to be as an ownership group to not have a contract done with your first round pick a month after you selected him? That's kind of nuts to me, is, just it's a holdout for a rookie, which, it's happened before. Like we saw it with Joey Bosa in, I think, I can't remember. That was like 2015 or something like that. But it's not something that happens often. It really, I think, just demonstrates how poor this ownership group is. I mean, Trey Hendrickson had a 22-minute media availability about a week ago where he basically was just telling reporters over and over again that his contract situation wasn't what he wanted it to be. And if the Bengals aren't going to sign him, then why not make the most of a trade with him, especially if you're going to spend a first round pick on a rookie defensive end? So the process behind all of their offseason, combined with their unwillingness to spend cash on whether it be rookies, free agents, anything of note, particularly when their defense was arguably the worst in the NFL last year, it is really, really frustrating if you're a Bengals fan.
And to talk about why not trade Trey Hendrickson and get the most out of it, the best time to do that would have been before the draft, right? Because now you don't know who's going to have future picks, right? You probably have an idea of who the teams that are going to be bad are. But if a bad team gets Trey Hendrickson, they could turn into a playoff team, right? And future picks are always discounted. So if you wanted to get something for him, something substantial, I think that time has passed. And then the whole offseason, right? This is an offseason where they finally shell out top dollar money for a wide receiver and pretty substantial money for a wide receiver too, right? and then to turn around and if you're a Bengals fan, you might be like, "Oh, this is finally it. We're finally making strides in being a modern NFL team, a modern ownership group that can hang with the rest of the NFL." And then just not sign your star player on defense, not sign your rookie over. It's reported like just like I think it was like medical concerns for the rookie camp or something like that.
It was offset language.
Oh boy,
So basically, how it works is if Shamar Stewart isn't good enough, like in his, let's say he's cut after his third year, um, essentially the offset language would mean that if he signs with another team, let's say it's the minimum, the minimum is taken out of what the Bengals would have to pay in dead cap. So essentially, like Shamar Stewart's kind of he wants he would want it to be where if they cut him, they move on from him, they still have to pay him all of that dead money rather
right.
than some of it being offset by his next contract.
So and especially with a top 20 pick, you're hoping you're never going to cut this guy, right? And
Yeah,
if that's the thing that they're being held up upon, what kind of things does that portend or what is that looking forward to? Are they afraid that they're going to have to cut their 17th overall selection and how that would financially impact the team? It'd probably be like $2 million, by the way, which in the grand scheme of the salary cap is nothing. But maybe for the Bengals it is because they're continuing to be a stingy team. It's just rough when you have the momentum going into the end of the season, right? Where they are on the outside the playoffs looking in. They lost well, it wasn't a tiebreaker because the Broncos had one more game, but there was a chance they could have gotten into the playoffs. Like there was a mathematical possibility. Then you go straight into extending your receivers, and now you're hung up on this. It reminds me of when the Panthers added, or like when they were trying to sign Brian Burns but didn't do it in training camp, and that all the hype behind, oh, we just got Bryce Young, we should be a good team now. All of that died going into the season because Brian Burns hadn't signed. You're supposed to have all this hype for this team, and now if you're a Bengals fan, I don't know how you can get excited. And as far as like, did the Bengals do enough, or what should we expect out of them? It's got to be more of the same because you're right. What like how substantial has their defense improved? Their defense was horrible last year, and if your star player is not going to play, even if he does play, they were horrible. Like, what else can you do to that defense?
it's really bad defense. The investment of a rotational linebacker, frankly, with a second round pick combined with just somebody who's probably not going to be much of a contributor in year one in the first round. Um, I don't think that's where they should have gone with those two picks in particular, right? If you told me that they drafted, let's just say Derek Harmon in the first round, right? And then they come back in the second round, they add, I'm not sure if he was even available, like Will Johnson in the second round, right? That combination of players is significantly more exciting to me than the two guys that they ended up adding, right? It wasn't the year to add a linebacker on day two of the draft, right?
Mm.
Um, if they wanted to do that, they probably should have just taken Jahad Campbell in the first round because after him and let's say Carson Swessinger, it's like just rotational guys. And to spend a top 50 pick on a guy like Knight, that's just not something I can get behind. Fairchild in the third round, interesting. But again, like he's going to be a backup guard year one, right? So realistically, you're not getting much impact year one from any of your first three draft picks. And combine that with like a free agency haul that includes one fringe starter in TJ Slayton. That's, you know, this defense was horrendous. They were allowing like 35-point games consistently last year. So for them to basically only add a new defensive coordinator, that's probably going to end up biting them.
And it's Al Golden, right, from Notre Dame,
Al
uh,
Golden, yeah, like
which is
former defensive coordinator from Notre Dame,
yeah,
linebackers background.
college to pros jump doesn't always necessarily work out the best, right? I think the most recent example is with Green Bay. They're hoping Jeff Hafley could really turn that defensive unit around, and I thought Green Bay's defense disappointed, especially with the investment that they have in that defense. I'm looking at on our lads, and it shows the depth chart, and it shows their draft pick beside the player. And the amount of top 3 round picks, or so day 1 and day 2 picks, that the Bengals have invested on defense over the last 3 or 4 years, and for them to not be at least average starters is just it's rough to look at. Like even last year, Chris Jenkins was their second round pick. He's being supplanted by TJ Slayton. A couple years ago, Miles Murphy was the first round pick. Hasn't
That's
turned
right.
out super well. Shamar Stewart isn't projected to start. I mean, he could start by the end of the offseason. You never know. Demetrius Knight. They took Barrett Carter, another linebacker, after that. So somebody that's even further down the depth chart. Dax Hill, Cam Taylor-Britt, both below average start. Or Dax Hill's average. Cam Taylor-Britt's not very good. Jordan Battle had his ups and downs. DJ Turner, I thought was a good prospect coming out of Michigan, I believe. Hasn't proven to be an effective starter. So there's all this investment, and they can't get good play out of this group. So maybe Lou Anarumo was the cause of it. Maybe Al Golden can extract more talent out of these high picks, but it's a hard bet to see cashing in this year.
Al Golden isn't necessarily a fresh face either. He was on the Bengals staff from 2020 to 2021. So it's not like
Hmm.
he's somebody who is like this Jesse Minter coming in who's
Yeah.
going to make the most of this talent. Like he was under Lou Anarumo for
So
back
more
in
of a comfort pick as well.
right.
Going back to Jerry Jones.
It's a comfort thing, and then it's like honestly, they probably should have gotten rid of Zach Taylor at the end of this past year too. Like he's not really done anything as a coach. Like that one Super Bowl appearance kind of bought him, quite literally bought him a lot more time. Just the Bengals don't really fire people before their contracts are up again because this ownership group is just horrendous in terms of the unwillingness to pay for guys that aren't on the team, dead money, that sort of thing. So it's a rough go if you're a Bengals fan. I kind of feel for you a little bit, but maybe Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, that trio is enough to get them, 9-10 wins, possibly into the playoffs.
And then you're lucky. Now you get to play Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, or Lamar Jackson at home. That's what you win.
Right.
It could have been different if the playoff seeding thing would have passed, but nope. The division winners still get the home matchup. Thankfully, it didn't pass. But yeah, it's a really rough outlook, I think, for the Bengals this year.
Let's move on to the next team. It is the San Francisco 49ers. So they also had a pretty interesting offseason. They lost a ton of guys: Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, Debo Samuel, a few other guys. They didn't really do much in free agency. Obviously, they have a ton of money tied into their star level players like Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk. Obviously Brock Purdy just got a pretty massive extension. They extended George Kittle as well. They signed DeMarcus Robinson, kind of a wide receiver 3-4. Maybe potentially could end up being that third receiver in this offense. And they also signed backup quarterback Mac Jones as well. Outside of that, nobody was really kind of sticking out to me from their free agency pool. But in the draft, in the first 3 rounds, they took Michael Williams, the Georgia edge, Alfred Collins, the Texas defensive tackle, and then they took Upton Stout, a kind of a small school DB, and they took Nick Martin, a linebacker, kind of on the smaller side. I think he's like 220 pounds, out of Oklahoma State. So I want to get your thoughts. I'm going to pose a question to you. Based off of this offseason and all of the losses incurred on this 49ers team, do you think that their Super Bowl window is closed?
In a vacuum, I'm going to say yes, right? All the superstars on their defense over the past couple of years are gone. You have an aging and didn't play last year, Christian McCaffrey. You do re-sign people like Kittle. Fred Warner just got a league-topping deal. Purdy's deal. I think Kittle also is now the highest paid tight end. But yeah, all of that stuff. And then I looked at the schedule. And then if you look at their schedule, I'm convinced that they're going to win at least 12 games because this schedule is so easy. And then once you're in the playoffs, I think Shanahan is a good playoff performer outside of the Super Bowl. So at least for this year, I think the window is still open. I can see you pulling up the schedule After that Texans game, just project how many losses you think that they have. Like, one or two, I think. And like, it's really favorable. Like, I think they'll make the playoffs, but then we can get more into that after you assess the schedule. I'll give you a second.
So I'll run through the schedule here, right? So they start Seattle, New Orleans, Cardinals, and then Jaguars are their first 4 games. Um, there's a lot of variance in what those teams could be, but generally they should have a winning record after those 4. Um, the next 4: LA Rams, Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and Houston. Um, yeah, not like the toughest schedule for the first half of the year, and then New York, LA again, New York Giants, I should say, LA again, Arizona again, and then the Carolina Panthers. New York should be a win. Arizona, I think I'm just lower on them than most people. I think going into next year based off of what they did this offseason. Carolina, we'll see. That's a Monday night game. They should be improved. Cleveland, then they have a bye. Tennessee and Indianapolis, 3 wins. Chicago and then Seattle to end the year. We'll see. They should have a winning record, honestly, just
Yeah.
based off of their schedule. Honestly, it's, yeah, like you said, it's a little bit less kind of inspiring, the level of opponents that they're playing compared to what I kind of expected. Um, this, I think that we're going to end up having to do an episode on the NFC West as a whole because it's a really interesting division based off of what I think Seattle has a ton of different outcomes that they could be this year. Same with Arizona, and I think LA is going to be a real force. But um, yeah, I mean, looking at it, I don't see like 9, 10, 11 wins as an impossibility. But I really do think that 2 things are going to end up catching them. The age for a lot of their stars. McCaffrey's up there. George Kittle, we'll see how long he can last. And then Brandon Ayuk, we'll see about him. But Trent Williams, another guy that's really old. Um, Second, I think that, the talent that they lost this offseason, it was a lot of like franchise kind of mainstays over the last few years, like Hufanga, Greenlaw, Debo Samuel. They lost a ton of rotational guys too. Um, they're really gonna have to bank on Brock Purdy being worth the money that they're paying him, right? And I think he's a good quarterback. I'm probably higher on him than most people, but I think that the natural regression from they're losing more than they're getting in this offseason. I think combined with the fact that, like we said with the Cowboys, most teams are just naturally going to be the opposite of that, where they're, gaining more players than they're losing. Um, I also think that the offensive line is going to come back to haunt them eventually. I don't think they made a single investment in their offensive line that was noteworthy this offseason. Like, it is outside of Trent Williams and I guess, Dominic Pooney, it is really bad. Like, that offensive line is frankly terrible. It's those 2 guys and then 3 players that probably are backups on most NFL teams. So I know Shanahan is somebody that can kind of scheme around that better than most coaches, but offensively, I think the talent level outside of George Kittle in their playmaking department, compared to a few years ago, it's like night and day worse than where it was.
I understand what you're saying, and I had all these thoughts before I dove into this question because I believe I was the one who posed it in the sheet. A couple things. Number one, last year, really, really bad injury luck. I think if they regress more toward average, get 8 games out of McCaffrey, Ayuk comes back like week 12 or something and is able to play, I think you can survive the weapons there. Shanahan and Shanahan's scheme, like people from his tree, are known to scheme around their offensive lines. And at least Purdy is more mobile than somebody like Tua Tagovailoa. And when they're firing on all cylinders, the Dolphins offense is able to survive. Also, Mac Jones is there now, who apparently is like Kyle Shanahan's favorite player. So I guess they can fall back on him. And then I really like what they did to the defensive line, or really the front 7 in the draft. And I think that they can get real production out of those guys early. The last thing I'll say is that defense last year regressed quite a bit, even before They got rid of the people like Hufunga and Green. Didn't get rid of them; they left. But they're bringing Robert Saleh back in there, one of the better defensive coordinators that Kyle Shanahan has had. That should at least help the discipline of the players and help them grow a bit. So uh, the Super Bowl window is probably closed, but the playoff window is wide open for me for the 49ers this year. It wouldn't surprise me if they win the division. And I think that if they can get into the playoffs, then there's a chance that they can make it all the way there. It's going to be hard to beat like the Eagles or somebody like that, but all it takes is one game. And I think that if Shanahan can recapture some of the magic of years past, they could get back to the big game.
Michael Williams, I think, was one of my single most favorite picks of the entire draft in April. Like, he just pairs well so perfectly with what Salah wants as a defensive end, and then B, just opposite Nick Bosa. He is a like true edge setter, and I think somebody that's going to translate really well to the NFL. Combine that with Alfred Collins, who they added in the second round. Realistically, those are their two best additions this offseason, right? And to add them both to a unit that desperately needed a talent upgrade, that's something that I genuinely think is applaudable from the 49ers perspective. I just think that the attrition as a whole, like you mentioned, the injuries, I think a lot of it with their injuries is just their players are old at this point, right? McCaffrey is old. Trent Williams is old. Kittle is kind of getting up there. We'll see if Ayuk is the same player that he was pre-injury. Defensively, like kind of same story with a bunch of the guys there. Obviously, like the two of the guys that they lost in Hufunga and Greenlaw, they were injured, and losing them is going to be less of an impact than if they were healthy the entire 4 years that they were there, right? Still, it's just I think that the offense, even with like Pearsall ascending and some of the other interesting kind of skill players that they've added, like I know you were pretty high on what's that receiver who they drafted in like the 6th round last year?
Jacob Cohen.
Yeah, I knew you were high on him. I think he's going to get legitimate playing time this year, which should be exciting. But yeah, I just think that the attrition of kind of what they've lost is probably greater than what they're going to end up gaining from a lot of these additions that they made.
It's a lot for sure, but I think that they're gaining the right pieces. I guess is how I would put it. Like new, not new, more discipline in the coaching room with Salah. I think they're getting a stronger defensive line. That was like a sneaky weakness for them last year. Is teams were able to run on them. Not going to be able to run on Alfred Collins and Michael Williams. So I think they're getting good there. I think that if they can get positive regression with the injury front on offense, then I think they should be in good shape. But it wouldn't surprise me if they win the division is kind of where I'm getting at, especially with the AFC West being kind of open. I know the Rams are the projected favorite, but if you look at last year, the Rams were like horrible to start the year and they just caught fire in the second half. So you never really know what can happen there.
I think it's like I want to pose a question to you actually. So if you look at it, Robert Saleh and Steve Wilks are kind of schematically flipping places from where they were at least to start last year. Who do you think is going to end up being more successful for their new team?
I think it's going to be Wilks, not only because I think he has the understanding of what Aaron Glenn wants, because Aaron Glenn's a defensive mind. I think that always helps when the head coach isn't calling plays, whatever side of the NFL world that they're from, offense or defense. I think that always helps the same person with the new coaching staff. Like this is a poor example, but with Carolina, Idzik, I think benefits a ton because Canales is an offensive guy, not just because they were on the same coaching staff, but it's stuff like that. So I think that, and I think the talent level on the Jets defense is younger on defense and maybe a little bit better right now. We can see how the 49ers additions do, like Michael Williams, I think can be really, really good. But I think that Jets have more established young pieces on defense. So I think Wilks is going to be able to get more out of them there.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I just think that the talent and the fit is probably going to end up being better with Steve Wilks in New York than it will be with Saleh in San Francisco. But I want to move on to the last team that we're going to talk about today. It's a big one, the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's been maybe not the most eventful offseason for the Chiefs, but they have some pretty notable losses and additions. So they lose Joe Tooney. They traded him to the Chicago Bears, probably their biggest loss of the offseason. Like he's a potential Hall of Fame level guard. They re-sign um, Trey Smith, their other guard, to a pretty substantial deal, if I'm not mistaken. They lose Justin Reed, Tershawn Wharton, and Derek Nottie, and then they draft Josh Simmons, Omar Norman Lott, Ashton Gelati, Noel Williams, while signing Christian Fulton and offensive tackle from the San Francisco 49ers, Jalen Moore. So I want to ask this question to you. Should the Chiefs be the AFC favorites in 2025?
I think you have to always give Reed and Mahomes the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, they lost a good amount of pieces, but I think they reloaded in areas that they needed as well. With that in mind, I think this is the first time that I'm ever going to say no, they shouldn't be the favorites in the Mahomes and Reed era. Number one, I think the Bills are like right on the cusp. Josh Allen played very, very well last year. I think the Bills have upgraded in areas that they needed to upgrade. I think the Ravens are in the same boat. Lamar Jackson would have been my MVP pick, but I'm not mad that Josh Allen won it. Like both of those guys really played out of their mind. I think Lamar Jackson upped his game even further from previous MVP seasons, and I think the Ravens reloaded quite well as well. I don't know. Like even last year when the Chiefs won, I think they were 15-2 or maybe 14-3. A lot of the games were like voodoo magic at the end of the game, so to speak, right? Like you'd see missed field goals. Somebody would have a false start on like a fourth down attempt, and that would end the game. Like there was a lot of iffy stuff, even against. I hate to keep bringing up the Panthers, but we're Panthers fans. Even against the Panthers, it took them Dane Jackson being scared to push Mahomes out of bounds and let him scramble. What was it, 35 or 40 yards to put them in range to hit a game-winning field goal. And so when you see the cracks start to form there, and then you see other teams take advantage of that, I really think we got to be looking at the Bills and the Ravens as the favorites to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl this year. You got to, or you don't have to remember, if you look at like preseason odds for games and stuff like that, and I know that that's not the end all be all, the Bills are favored in all 17 games, and I believe the Ravens are favored in all other games except the matchup with the Bills. Or maybe it's another game. But I think Vegas respects the Bills as one of the favorites and the Ravens as the favorites. I think that as long as those teams continue to improve, as long as those quarterbacks continue to improve, we should treat them as the favorites as well.
There's, I think, a lot of questions with this Chiefs team that I have. First of all, I think the offensive skill guys it's a weird group, right? Kelsey is like really up there. I think he very clearly lost another step this past season, especially like in the playoffs. He looked pretty rough. Rashee Rice looked like an all-pro caliber receiver for like the first 2.5 weeks before he got hurt last year. And then I really like Xavier Worthy, how he came along towards the end of last season and particularly in the playoffs, right? On the offensive line, they made a few interesting bets. Jalen Moore, Josh Simmons, theoretically, one of those guys is going to be able to play left tackle for you next year, right? On the interior, I kind of think, even with age factored in, they kept the wrong offensive guard. I think Trey Smith is kind of a boom or bust offensive guard, just pretty inconsistent. That's not necessarily what I would aim for with an offensive lineman. But I understand, he's like nearly a decade younger than a guy like Joe Tooney, right? He's incredibly physically gifted. They hit on him in like the 6th round in I think 2021, if I'm not mistaken. So I get the bet there. I question, they lost a lot of interior offensive line talent with Tershawn Wharton, Derek Nottie. They didn't really replace those guys. So I wonder, with the additions of like Omar Norman Lott, who's more of a pass rusher, Ashton Gelati, who's going to be more of an edge setter, I wonder how much talent this defense can realistically lose without it being affected, at least from the interior, kind of the spine of the defense. Even the linebacking core, outside of like Leo Chenal, was pretty rough last year, and they retained Nick Bolton on a pretty substantial contract. So I really wonder if the defensive talent is going to be enough. But if there's one defensive coordinator that I trust above like everybody else, it's probably Spags.
Yeah, and I know you're sharing concerns with the front. I think the back end is equally as concerning, right? Christian Fulton, I think he shined last year when he was on the field, but he's been consistent at staying on the field throughout his young career. They drafted the corner from Cal to, I guess, is an insurance piece for that. But even then, I don't really think Jalen Watson is a super solid corner too, assuming McDuffie plays the slot. And even in safeties, then they lose Justin Reed, right? So they're having to rely on incumbent players like Brian Cook, Chamari Connors, Jaden Hicks, who was a third or fourth rounder in last year's draft. I don't know. It seems like all that they've had this high level of superstars and depth built up throughout the Mahomes run. And I think that when the superstars are leaving, like we saw L'Jarius Sneed get traded last year, and then the depth has to become the starter, I think we're losing the depth there on the back end. And now I think we're seeing even more of that. Like you talked about them losing Joe Tooney. They drafted a guy in the second round of last year's draft, Kingsley Suamataia, to be their left tackle, but now they have to play him at guard because that's the depth, right? They signed Jalen Moore in free agency to be their left tackle, drafted a guy who hopefully is healthy and can play there. But then other side of the other side of the line, like Trey Smith, like you said, is boomer bust. Jawan Taylor seems like he's every other play collecting a false start. Maybe even though they don't really call that penalty anymore, he still is good for a couple of those per game. So, and then the receiver room in particular, this team immediately, like as soon as free agency opened, like went out and tried to get Hollywood Brown back in the building. He did resign, I think, for a 1-year deal. But I think that speaks to how they felt about the rest of the room, especially
Yeah.
with Rashee Rice coming off the injury, which was it was a rough one, and a potential suspension for him once he does come back. Maybe they thought Worthy hadn't taken like the superstar leap yet, so they wanted more insurance there. Uh, I don't know. It's just every time I look at a position, I can find a fault with it. And with the Chiefs, you haven't really been able to do that the past couple of years. But this is the year that I think an opportunistic Bills team or an opportunistic Ravens team could really take advantage.
I feel like we've said the same thing like the past 2 years, right? 2023 and 2024. I still just at some point it's got to come back to bite them, right? Just
Mhm.
the lack of talent compared to these other contending type of teams. Like it could not have been more apparent the difference in talent between the Eagles and Chiefs, for
Yeah.
instance. And honestly, if you take let's just remove quarterbacks from every roster in the NFL and just kind of evaluate everything else in a vacuum. This team is probably middle of the pack in terms of just overall talent. Whereas, a few years ago, this is like, pound for pound, one of the more talented units in the NFL. So I think that, you're naturally just going to have a floor with how bad you can be with Patrick Mahomes. But, you know, I think the Chiefs are very solid, like going to be a playoff team, 3, 4, 5 seed type of team. It's just maybe the ceiling is a little bit more capped than it has been in previous years.
I like that you posed if you took away the QB or if you put like a random name tag on him and stacked it up. I did that exercise before the Super Bowl on my podcast, Perfect Takes, and it was stack up both Super Bowl teams and take the coach and the QB outside of it. The Eagles were the clear winner in every single position, and that was even if you wanted to argue like Travis Kelsey. Dallas Goddard played much better than Kelsey did once Goddard came back and was healthy at the end of the year, and it showed up on the field, right? I think when you mentioned over the past couple of years, we said the same thing with the Chiefs, but they figure it out, right? 3 consecutive Super Bowls, right? They won the first one against the Eagles, close game, right? They won the second one against the 49ers, another close game. The third time, the Eagles blew them out. I know it was 40-16 or whatever the final score was. That's a fake score. It was really 40-0 or 34-0. And when you're coming off that vision of that Super Bowl, which had the worst score bug in NFL history, by the way,
You worse.
anytime it looks like one of us could whip it up in about 2 minutes in Google Sheets. But when you look at that game, and that's the last image you see of the Chiefs in your mind, I don't know, it just sticks with me, especially when the Bills played them close in the playoffs. The Bills beat them in the regular season. The Ravens almost beat them. It was, I think, Isaiah likely stepped out of bounds on a fourth down touchdown catch that could have won them the game. So I don't know. I just think that their time in the sun might start to be setting, and especially with, and I don't think they're going to lose the division this year, but their division, I think, is one of the more stacked division in terms of quarterback, head coach, and like auxiliary talent with teams like that. Like you look at the Chargers, Harbaugh and Herbert. The Raiders now have Pete Carroll and Geno Smith. The Broncos, obviously, Sean Payton and Bo Nix. Two of those teams made the playoffs last year. So I think with all three of those teams nipping at the Chiefs' heels now, it's going to be tougher for them to be considered the main image of the AFC.
This is kind of a side note, but later on in the offseason, I want to do like a league pass type of rankings. I think the Raiders are probably going to be near the top of mine just from the pieces that they have with Ashton Genty, Brock Bowers. And then I think their receiving room is like sneaky, really fun too. Jacoby Myers, Jack Besh. They added Dante Thornton. Tommy Millott was like a sixth round converted quarterback. So I think they're going to be a ton of fun to watch and probably are going to be a team trying to throw the ball a lot because that defense is really horrendous. So, aside from that, like I agree. It's just the talent level with this Chiefs team is just not what it has been. And even, losing guys like Justin Reed, who they didn't really try to replace. Like, I guess they're trying to replace him with players already on the roster. Tershawn Wharton is a guy that really grew for that team over the past few years. Omar Norman Lott, I guess, is the theoretical replacement there. But yeah, it's just a lot of aging with a ton of these players as well. So I think it's setting up for them to probably do a retool type of offseason at some point in the near future, whether it's, just moving off of a lot of these older players and kind of adding a few more draft picks, trying to kind of recreate the roster for kind of a second run at sustained success. So we'll see if that happens at some point. I think there's just going to be a point in time where you can only be so good in the NFL for so long before it kind of comes crashing down. And I think at some point it's bound to happen with this Chiefs team.
Yeah, even the Patriots dynasty had some lean years, right? From 03 to 07, obviously no Super Bowl appearances. And then from 03 to what, 2014, right? They didn't have any wins. That's like a
Yeah.
decade long period of no wins. That's why people say the Patriots dynasty is really two dynasties because of the gap there. So even a guy as talented as Mahomes, even a coach as talented and as intelligent as Andy Reid, it's going to catch up to him some point.
So, kind of speaking of like league pass type of teams, the last topic that we're going to talk about today is kind of just matchups that we're really excited about based off of the NFL schedule release. So let's start with kind of your first matchup. We each chose just 3 primetime games, right? We limited it to that just because we don't know what else is going to be kind of televised and where we're living. So we'll start with your first matchup. What did you have as kind of your first highlighted must-watch primetime game?
So all of mine are Monday, which I'm just now discovering. I didn't mean to do it that way. But week 3, Monday Night Football, you have the Detroit Lions going to the Baltimore Ravens. Really like that matchup. Number one, Lamar Jackson's probably my favorite QB to watch in the league. Favorite non-Panthers player, I'd have to say. And I really want to see how the Lions, after losing Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, and like a host of other coaches along that staff, I want to see how they're able to bounce back because I think they can rally for Dan Campbell. I just got to see who the next crop of coaches are going to be and how they're going to instill talent, how they're going to have their guys up and ready to fight against a really good Ravens team. I think that's really going to be a good test for the Lions, who might take a step back with all the coaches leaving, but I think that's going to be a good one to watch on Monday.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I think it was 2 years ago at this point, where the Lions visited the Ravens. It was like a 1 p.m. game. And then the Ravens just completely blew the Lions out of the water. It was like 38-6 was the final
Mhm.
score, something like that. Um, This will probably be a much better game than that. But I like your point about Lamar just being a super fun quarterback to watch. I was thinking about it this week where like what is my favorite trait of any quarterback in the NFL? And I think it's like Lamar's ability to just constantly keep his eyes downfield while simultaneously avoiding like the most chaotic pocket you've ever seen.
Mhm.
Um, it's truly just incredible his pocket management and just always kind of finding downfield receivers. Like his stats last year, I don't think people realize how ridiculous Lamar's stats were in 2024, where it was like 41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, obviously a ton of yards and touchdowns added on the ground as well. Just truly an incredible quarterback. And my first matchup also has Lamar Jackson. It's week 1. Baltimore is traveling to the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football. So that is going to be one where obviously the two MVP candidates of 2024 were matched up against each other. And I think it's honestly one that could affect playoff seeding. Even 20 weeks away from when the playoffs start, it could be a determinant for like the first or second overall seed in the AFC.
Yeah, really fun game. Past two MVP winners as well, not just the candidates of last year. And I think the playoff game in Buffalo, I think Baltimore is going to want to correct that. They came within, I don't want to say that they were going to push it to OT because the Bills still had like 90 seconds and a couple timeouts to move it down the field. But it was a close game. Mark Andrews obviously drops the 2-point conversion, pun intended. And it just went downhill from there. But like I said, really love watching Lamar Jackson. I think he and Josh Allen are like the clear best QBs in the league, at least last year. I know Mahomes is in his own territory just on what he's done, but he didn't play like the best QB last year. That was Lamar and Josh Allen. So really looking forward to that one.
Moving on, what's your kind of second matchup that you're looking forward to?
So this one, another Monday Night Football, Week 6. The Bears are visiting the Commanders. I think the Hail Mary game was in Washington last year as well,
Yeah.
so it's a grudge match for the Bears. Another Caleb Williams versus Jaden Daniels game, which should be fun. And I think the Bears are going to want to go in there and just kick Washington's teeth in after what happened last time. And I wonder how well Ben Johnson has gelled with Caleb Williams to this point. If they're playing like I think they will, and I think he'll take quite a leap with Ben Johnson as head coach, this should be a pretty fun shootout as opposed to the last game, which was really boring up until that Hail Mary. If you recall, Washington led like the entire game. Chicago like didn't score till like 6 minutes in the fourth quarter, and it was like a Roshan Johnson like half-yard touchdown, and then there's another running back touchdown. But hopefully we get more scoring and more highlight plays than this one. It'd be cool if we got another Hail Mary, but I don't know if that one's in the cards.
This is arguably the biggest game that Tyreek Stevenson will ever play in
Yeah.
his career, right?
If he plays again.
If he plays again. Yeah. New coaching staff, new defensive coordinator. We'll see. But there's just going to be a camera panned on him like the entire game, I think.
Mhm.
So we'll see if he can redeem himself for that unfortunate mistake last year. Probably not. That's not really something I don't think you can come back from. But really fun matchup. We'll see kind of if Ben Johnson has the goods. The Bears actually play, I think, week 1 on Monday Night Football against the Vikings, if I'm not mistaken. So we're gonna find out pretty early what this Bears offense looks like. So if they do have the goods, this should be an incredible kind of Monday night matchup. So moving on, my next kind of game to look out for is a lot later in the year. It's week 11. Detroit is traveling to Philadelphia for Sunday Night Football. This is going to be a really fun game. I talked about, potentially Baltimore, Buffalo, and week 1 determining playoff standings. With this one being, a little bit into the second half of the year, you could really feel the weight of this impact. I mean, you could possibly see Detroit being like, I don't know, 8-2, and Philly being kind of a similar record, matching up in a really, really strong game, I think, here.
Yeah, when you're this late in the season, right? not only is it going to impact playoff seeding because games like this always will, but you can kind of project and see where you're going to finish, right? Unless something crazy occurs, like with the Jaguars a couple years ago when they were 8-3 and just tailed off, you should have an idea of, okay, we need to win four of our last six to get the one seed or the two seed or whatever. Or if we win this game, we're up in the division or something like that. I think not only could both of these teams be like 8-2 or something, Detroit, if they regress, they could be fighting for like a wild card spot or something. And this could be a big like tiebreaker win over teams in their division to get into something like that. So I think this will be a good one. Hopefully, Detroit will have figured out their new identity by then. So we'll still be able to see all the like the highlight makers, Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Isaac Tesla. Hopefully, will be able to make some good plays.
He'll be
Uh,
fun to track. I think
yeah,
we'll see if he's actually a contributor in year one, but he'll be at least fun to kind of track throughout the year. So, what was your next game that you had?
so my last one, also Monday night, it is the Carolina Panthers going to San Francisco. This one doesn't have as many stakes, probably. I can't imagine the Panthers are in the discussion like the Eagles are in or stuff like that. But this is an interesting game because, we started in the NFC West, right? In that division with the 49ers. That's when the Panthers were an expansion team, got added to the league. Panthers are 13-9 all time against San Francisco. So it's a little bit closer than you would imagine. Like I think about all the Cam Newton teams that we played, like Cam Newton versus Colin Kaepernick, a lot of storied games against the Niners. They've really like kicked our teeth in the last couple of times. It's our first Monday night game in a couple of years, which will be fun to see. And the Panthers' first ever Monday night game was against San Francisco. It was in Carolina, but I think that'll be a fun game to see. And I think this whole season with the Niners is really going to be about, can Brock Purdy prove that he's a franchise guy now that he has the extension, and can Bryce Young with the Panthers prove that he's a franchise guy coming off of a hot stretch to end the year, but having a really tumultuous rookie year and start to his second year where he got benched. So a lot to prove for both QBs. And I think there could be stuff at stake, like for a Panthers wild card maybe, or if the Niners are trying to win the division, they need as many games as they can get.
This is going to be Bryce Young. Assuming they don't flex this out, this will be Bryce Young's first time playing in prime time since he played on Thursday night against Chicago in his rookie year,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a while, especially when you consider like he was playing prime time every single week back in college, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be fun to see him kind of get back to it against this 49ers team, which I think, like we said, has kind of a lot to prove this offseason. So the last game that I had and that we'll talk about today, it's Thanksgiving, which I think makes it a little bit more fun. Usually the Thanksgiving games haven't been as fun in recent years, at least, but it's Cincinnati going on the road to Baltimore on a Thursday. I think that this is just a really fun game that's going to have a ton of fireworks too. Like the last two games that these teams played against each other, the final score for each, like I guess the over under, it was the over by quite a bit in both matchups. Like there was 70 combined points, I'm sure, at least in both those games. So I think it's going to be a fun matchup with a ton of scoring on both sides. And I think Lamar Jackson always just has the best games against Baltimore. And I guess Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase have the best games against Baltimore as well. So
Yeah, and if Cincinnati's in a similar spot to where they were last year, this could be a must-win game for them.
yeah.
Could be huge for Baltimore too, trying to stay the number one seed if that's where they're at in the AFC. This is the night game too, right? So this will be after. I think all three games are decent this year. I don't remember who the Cowboys play, but I know it's Packers Lions for that matchup.
Chiefs, I think.
Oh, so I think that's three solid Thanksgiving matchups. Obviously, capping off with the division matchup there. I'm looking at all the games that we've talked about. 3 Ravens games and 2 Lions games are like the most popular teams between us. So I think both of us are interested to see how Lamar Jackson and the Ravens turn out and how the Lions are able to not bounce back, but deal with all the coaching staff losses that they've had this past offseason.
Are there any teams kind of outside the ones that we've talked about that you're kind of more interested in than maybe most people?
I would say the Saints, and it's not just because they're in the same division.
I can't
Just
wait to watch the Saints for
just
like
as I hate watch, yeah. So I've spoken at length about Tyler Shuck and how I may not believe in his NFL upside, and I'm also because I'm like a big draft guy, right? Like all of us are. I'm like on number one pick watch, and the Saints stick out to me. Like maybe the Browns stick out, but I really want to see how the Saints play this year because they just don't have a ton of premium players at really any position. I like their young tackle duo, but again, we haven't seen Kelvin Banks play yet. So just on both sides of the ball, how bad can the Saints be? I would love for them to like just be the worst team of all time in some certain metric, like we were on defense. That would make my season. But yeah, I'm interested to see just how poorly the Saints play.
it would really irk me if they lucked into like Lenore Sellers for
Hmm.
some reason. That would be my personal nightmare scenario. But with that, I think we're gonna wrap up today's show. We appreciate everybody for listening live to Football Talk by the 2 Point Conversion. If you have not already, please subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can follow Jacob at Jacob LaQuire, myself at dj.png. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at 2p_conversion. And Jacob, do you have any pieces you want to plug for the 2 Point Conversion or anything else?
I did just write about the rule changes, even though there's not a lot of rule changes that went on at the meeting. I'm glad that they withdrew the playoff seating one, like we're talking about. But man, I wish they would have banned the tush push. It's not that I'm being a hater. It's just so boring to watch.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen every time they line up. But that piece, and then throughout the offseason, I'll have an offseason progress report for each team, like projected starters, losses, a lot of the stuff we talked about here. But it'll be one of 32 for each team, and we're going to start pumping those out pretty soon. So excited for those.
Yeah, I mean, one of the rule changes that did pass was they're allowing NFL players to participate in flag football at the
Hmm.
Olympics. So, me, you, two other people, Akil Chandler for the 2 Point Conversion, did a kind of fantasy flag football draft. So, stay tuned for that. We talked about Tyler Shuck a little bit today. I've got a film study coming out on him at some point in the near future. We'll see. Spoiler alert, I don't think he's really going to be worth talking about for very long. But yeah, with that said, we're going to get out of here. We appreciate you guys for watching, and peace.